Chapter 9. An Exercise in Humility. The Office of Naval Intelligence will be holding a further press conference at 12:30 Earth Standard Time. I will be taking no further questions. The room exploded, papers, tablets, and people leaping to their seats, all of them screaming questions about military maneuvers way above their pay grade. The Chancellery had paid good money to streaming services across human space to prioritize this conference. Headspace had a banner on its front page marking the announcement. Media channels were live streaming Durazo's press release like it was the second coming of Christ. There was some benefit to ruling a former police state, she supposed. Low prices on airtime. Patricia was glad her Marine escort was with her. Bulky soldiers with guns tended to spook all but the most desperate reporters, which meant that only 3 or 4 tried to pull the old interview while walking routine. The Barrow Star's reporter, a woman with a future in football judging by her ability to dodge her escort, got the closest. Chancellor Durazo, can you comment on the fact that enemy troop numbers greatly exceeded station garrisons? The Chancellor stopped when she heard that. Troop numbers hadn't been released to the press. What's your name? The Chancellor asked, letting the commotion of reporters sweep around her. The reporter handed her a folded paper before disappearing into the crowd. As her procession began to march through the waves of cameras and questions, she opened the card, finding 2 golden energy swords crossed behind a Sangheili skull. She muttered a choice word before calling Amity from her neural lace. Schedule a quantum link with Barrow's Sangheili embassy. The Arbiter wants to chat. Barrow was a beautiful planet, one of the few colonies spared the onslaught of the Great War, and as a result, one of the most populated planets in human space. Patricia had enjoyed almost 59% of the vote from Barrow during election year, being that the planet was a bastion of xenophiles and forward thinkers. Logically, it was the best place to put an important Sangheili embassy, or several, she supposed. Although the sovereign state of the Swords of Sanghelios, you almost miss the prophets with names like that, was far and away the most powerful Sangheili empire. Various small fries had popped out of the state following Thelvadam's death nearly 2 decades before. Sure, ostensibly they were still protectorates of the state, but in reality the Swords of Sanghelios could scarcely secure their own borders, much less impose their will on a bunch of lowly rascals, calling themselves republics and the like. Still, it was best not to talk about the satellites around the Swords, and doubly so around the Arbiter. Ah, right. She pondered the pure scale of the distance between the 2 heads of state. Earth was only 11 light-years from the Procyon system, sure, but Barrow was merely a way station for her message. Sanghelios? Nearly a kiloparsec. The Arbiter was about 3,000 light-years away, and she'd be talking to him in real time. It had taken an average ship the better part of a week to travel that. Sometimes she regretted not getting her engineering degree. This was one of those times. Chancellor, we're receiving on this end. Do you accept the call? A technician asked nonchalantly, as if this space magic wasn't insane. I do. Thank you, Pasek. You're free to go. The screen flashed to life unceremoniously, and she was face to face with the Arbiter. Him. Jules Darim struck an imposing figure on a screen. Most Sangheili did, to be fair, though most Sangheili didn't wear suits of silver armor on conference calls either. Darim spread his mandibles wide in what amounted to a Sangheili greeting. Madam Chancellor, it is a blessing to have your beauty grace my screen once again. The Chancellor suppressed a rolling of the eyes. You know you could just go through the normal diplomatic channels for something like this, Darim. The Sangheili loosed a chuckle. You and I both know it is not as fun that way, and from what I can glean from human news, you could use a bit of entertainment. Patricia sighed. Is there a reason we're talking Jules, or are you just trying to annoy me? The Arbiter pulled back in mock surprise. I suppose Shang-Chi truly has gotten to you, Chancellor. Very well, we shall cut the small talk. We have advanced reconnaissance from Shang-Chi. Patricia said nothing, hiding her curiosity with an expression of bored impassion. Thank you, Arbiter. Could you add it to the pile so I can be on my way? I thought we agreed to cut the crap, Durazo. Despite the fleet's state of disrepair, we both know our sensors are still superior to yours, as are our stealth frigates. So you're admitting to violating human space again? A smile, a macabre display to human sensibilities, graced Darrin's face. I only figured you could use all the help you could get, madame. Is that not true? The Sangheili inhaled deeply before releasing a great sigh. I suppose this is itself entertainment for you. Patricia let her own smirk show. You know the answer to that already, I imagine. I will admit I would be willing to bargain for such information. Don't worry, Duraso. The information is free. Darrin's voice dropped. It's joviality. I'm afraid your relief force won't be enough. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Setting aside for the moment how you have details on troop movements, based on what evidence? Based purely on ship numbers, I'm afraid. You can take a look for yourself. A Sangheili report, top secret if she remembered her Sangheili script correctly, appeared on the screen, along with a series of long-range radiographic scans that appeared to be a star system. Enemy ship movements? Christ. It seems Admiral Shu's theory was right. The fork really was a transport system. As you can probably see, the 200 ships of your garrison detachment will be facing up to 350 enemy crafts. And that's the low estimate. I'm grateful for this information, Arbiter, but I wonder why you'd even give it to me. Is the spirit of cooperation not enough? He chuckled at his joke. If those aliens dared attack your colonies, why not ours? Though I suppose that is beside my point, Chancellor. I've contacted you to offer our military services. Surprise drenched her face. Arbiter? Darrin held up a hand. Hold your protest, Patricia, and let me finish. Your people have given ours a great deal, helped us find a place in this galaxy after we learned of our betrayal, helped us turn swords into plows, if that's how your idiom goes, helped us deal with our own strife, Patricia hid her wince at those words, to the best of your ability. Sangelios is in your debt, and it is now that we will begin to repay it. Existing in the realm of data was a difficult prospect to explain. Humans always ask the question. A jarhead in 3rd Recon used to fit it into almost every conversation they had. So is it like a series of tubes? Sometimes he'd say it with a straight face in a lull of conversation, or interject it into one of his operational readiness reports before busting up. She really liked, what's his name? Always said, call me Indiana, the dog, not the error dollar. Dollar. The first few times she tried to explain what her mother taught her, the old rivers and streams metaphor for surfing the web as a digital sophone. But that damn jarhead always asked, but what's it really like? And she'd just sigh and ignore him for a bit. If she was honest, data space really was like swimming in water, at least as she understood swimming, murky yet almost weightless, easily swept up in the currents of the data sphere. Right now that current was a rapid, trying to rake her over the riverbed and slam her into cliffs. Such were the trials of infiltrating alien dreadnoughts. A cute name for a 1-kilometer vessel. Another hastily built logic virus latched onto her, and she disarmed it casually, navigating the ever more security ship systems. Honestly, this electronic assault wasn't so bad in context. In training, hell, in the security sims, there was a tougher fight. Another logic virus, another clean dispersal. You'd think they were trying to bore her to death. She set up several hundred decoys and jumped currents, heading back to her ultimate target, the FTL engines. Unlike most of their other systems, including their main weapons, as she'd learned to her utter delight, these ones were protected with difficult firewalls, and as a result, she was going to need some time to beat them. Chasing dumb copies of herself running amok would surely buy her some time to do just that. It was a short, stealthy journey there, dodging the increasingly clumsy scans of their automated intelligences, as she'd taken to calling them, and abusing a relatively well-hidden chink in their armor to access. More firewalls. At least these ones had fun names. ESO core access, hyper-array charging, static discharge array, lots of buttons that shouldn't be pressed. It made the inner rabble-rouser blush with possibilities. She recognized ESO as one of the important things that powered their FTL and decided to try and access that. Bing, bang, boom. Oh, her initial approach only seemed to increase security. Shit. A quick dodge saved her from a monstrous little virus. This was no logic plague, more a DDoS on steroids. If they'd hit her with it, she'd have been out of commission for too long. But it wouldn't have disabled her. Really, the stun it would have imparted might have kept her occupied only a few seconds. What would the point of that be? Ah, a query virus. She slipped out of the room just as the network she'd infiltrated became a closed loop. These bastards were getting smart. She left a dummy copy behind to fool them for a time while she worked on a new plan. She took a look at the scanning data the reticent was picking up and did her own look over. Even if the Turians couldn't see it, the remnants of the defense fleet were beginning to show up on scans, at least in the radiographic ones. Small distortions in background radiation might be ignored by a species that didn't know about slipspace engines, but to her, the fleet was a burning star. The gas giant they had taken shelter in could do little to hide the hawking radiation signatures. This little check-in was routine, and she was ready to stop scrutinizing her readout when she caught it herself. In Section 14, Subsection 1. A4, was that a cloaking signature? The warmth of the bed was intoxicating, but she shrugged it off anyway. There was no time to waste. Indeed, there was rarely any time to sleep. Kyle had left a glass of Nasser on her bedside, and she gulped it down eagerly, the biting sweet barely noticed by a mind already in overdrive. On her other hand, she activated her Omni tool and scrolled purposefully through the news feeds and her own intelligence reports simultaneously, eyes darting this way and that over urgent reports and fascinating rumor. Even with a full-time staff of feed editors, garbage still filtered in regularly, sometimes at her request. The plot synopsis for the latest episode, her favorite serial, was always included somewhere in the list. Even counselors had their guilty pleasures after all. Lyle has his liquors, Tavos has her maidens, and she has her broodmothers on Gillinox 5, and her Nasser, which was less well known. Can't have Surkesh know about the child's drink she's addicted to. That might be scandalous. Kyle came in with her breakfast, right as she was getting to the more consequential business in her daily report. Batarian redeployment of their 1st and 4th Fleet to the Terminus might mean some unregulated expansion the STG would need to deal with. Troublesome, but ultimately unconcerning. Durztech was being acquired by Elkos Combine. Another change to the supply fleet means another headache for logistics. We'll try to throw some weight around, stop the acquisition. Another Turian fleet rerouting to Atticon Traverse, region approximating 314. What are those bastards doing? Contacts in the border and patrol complex had been silent. Either they'd been kept in the dark on purpose, or what? She called her STG contact. The line only rang once. This is Liaison Jerry. To what do I owe the pleasure, counselor? Jerry, can you update me on the status of our deep cover frigate assigned to the Batarian raids? The agent was typing before she'd finished her sentence. Which call signs, counselor? Wandering Eye. Last comms were about 2 weeks ago, typical for this particular type of mission. I suppose, do we have whereabouts for the 172nd Patrol? Or the 175th, for that matter. To my eye, they both dropped out off the face of the galaxy. Do you think they were destroyed? It was a casual question, further belied by the efficient typing of the Solarian agent. No, but I do find it suspicious that we haven't learned of their status officially, particularly in the face of seeming Turian indifference. The agent's eyes brightened. You think they're hiding something? Shall I liaison with our handlers at BPC? Don't bother. They don't have any applicable information. Talk with Deep State and keep me posted. I have a meeting to make. The feed was cut, and she was already slipping into the shawl fitting a Dalatras of her rank. The suit was on in moments, though she noticed a growing pain in her shoulder as she donned her hood. Such are the pains of duty, she mused, before continuing down her list of info. The private council chambers were only a relatively short lift from her suite, which gave her plenty of time to digest what remained of her mountain of reports. She'd come up with a strategy for nudging her colleagues into an anti-merger stance, and perhaps she'd bring up the 314 shenanigans to Sporadus in a roundabout way, as a treat. No need to spring this on a junior counselor just yet. It would be quite rude. The Solarian didn't seem to spare a thought to the awesome view from the Citadel elevator's windows, or even to the uncomfortable glances given by the various aides in the elevator with her. And Asari tried to keep her eyes on everything except the Dalatras. A pair of Turians seemed to squeeze themselves into the far corner. Of course, the Dalatras was still cognizant of the awkward silence. She just didn't care. If anything, it was amusing to the old woman, who began to hum a quiet jingle as she read. When the elevator finally opened to her floor, she walked out leisurely, enjoying the warm aromas of the Citadel garden and the bustle of activity. Of course, not with her eyes, which were still busy looking over details on a Hanar colonization effort being proposed in contested space. Before she knew it, the counselor had made her way to the private chambers, passing by the stationed Turian guards as if they were statues at attention. She came upon an empty room, upholstered well enough, she supposed. It was nothing like her summer home on Surkesh. She poured herself a glass of water and sat in her designated chair, staring intently at her screen. If she was right, and she rarely wasn't, Tavos would be here right about. The door gracefully slid open, and the Asari mirrored its grace, nodding respectfully to her tailing bodyguard before entering alone. "Early as always, Oline," Tavos cracked as she made her way to the wine cabinet. "I've not so much time to waste as you, Tavos, nor as much liver." Oline didn't know eye-rolling could be so loud. In other news, the Batarians are up to something in the terminus again. Tavos was pouring something impressively old into her glass, and I'm sure the STG will handle it, as they always do. She raised the bottle, a Thessian 2099, to her colleague. Oline didn't even glance before wiggling her horns to the negative. The Asari sighed. "Besides, we already went over this yesterday, did we not?" "True, though we are about 85% certain that it contains elements of both their first and fourth fleets." "Ah, perhaps they're what's causing the holdup in 314? Curious, but unlikely that Turian forces would engage in conflict without even alerting us." Tavos only smiled at that before taking her own seat. The Solarian counselor finally looked up from her slate. "It seems Sparatus is a bit late today, does it not?" "Later than usual, yes. He doesn't like missing a good vintage." The door struggled to open before the Turian counselor stormed in. Tavos smiled tightly. "Speak of the Thrasher. Sparatus, how nice of you to join us." She aimed her voice an octave too high, trying to irritate the hangover that was his usual cause for tardiness. However, instead of the normal signs of post-drunken recovery on a Turian, loose phalanges, slightly lagging step, gray eyes, the man simply looked tired. Exhausted was perhaps a better fit. "Room, activate information security protocols," was his reply. The room quickly followed his orders. The luxurious view of the Citadel was closed off, and the air took on an almost static quality as sound dampeners and frequency jammers took effect. He gathered himself. "I'm afraid I have some bad news." "Spirits? Spirits, damn them all." The air grew considerably more still as the Litronox smashed tablets and scratched deep rivets into the sound dampeners in the wall. Somehow, despite literally blasting a hole into the center of their presumed comms hub, their electronic attacks was only growing in strength. Civilian internment camps were only getting rowdier, and in the last pockets of resistance were hidden either in underground bunkers that had to be painstakingly cleared, or in the countryside biding their time. Why were they still fighting? Their city in rubble, their fleet in hiding, their armies dead and scattered? "Why?" the admiral roared, anger coating his every action. One officer, an infosec leader he supposed, spoke up. We think they were able to escape the trap, sir, and set a decoy to keep us thinking we'd succeeded in capturing." He trailed off. "Let me ask all of you this, just so I can be clear. We are hunting a direct control electronic warfare package that is somehow able to anticipate when we are going to attempt to trick it and navigate it itself through our firewall while we were blasting every jamming signal and interdiction array we had, practically irradiating ourselves in the process, might I add. And it did all of this with no time lag, in less than a millisecond. A fucking millisecond!" The admiral looked like he was about to collapse. "Correct me if I happen to be wrong, officers, but I know of not a single comms device that could be both invisible to surface scans, powerful enough to reach this high, and also, faster than light. The room looked down, a mixture of shame and fear keeping their heads low. So does anyone have any idea how these savage primitives have managed to break every known principle of physics? Or should I have all of you arrested for incompetence? Sir, one of the officers stood, though her eyes didn't meet the raging fury of her superiors. I think we may be dealing with an AI. A ripple of protest bounced across the cluttered room, some of disbelief, others of pure incredulity. They are primitives? Impossible? Are you out of your mind? The Admiral, however, was less skeptical. Quiet. Officer, explain your rationale. Well, if all other methods are impossible, what is left but the improbable? The Admiral pondered that for a moment. And what would you recommend we do if this were the case? Geth protocol states we should evacuate personnel and prepare for a system wipe in the case of an infiltration we can't repel, which is infeasible when you're the flagship, Litronox finished. The man sighed. In recent weeks, he'd gotten quite good at that. Spirits, keep me posted on this and adjust your methods to account for possible artificial intelligences. Increase network lockdowns while you're at it. Restrict its movement as much as possible. I will be on the bridge. With that, he left the room. It was a quiet walk to the command deck, and not simply because of the tense atmosphere surrounding the Admiral. All over the ship, subroutines and programs had been shut off, trapped, or otherwise disabled. That left lights intermittently on, ventilation systems barely running, and the corridors practically silent, as crew members avoided these areas like the plague. The worst place to be in a starship is the place without power, and now that 60% of the reticent was shut down, that was pretty much everywhere but work areas and bunks. When the Admiral finally reached the bridge, it was equally silent. Status report, Litronox asked. His voice was taut and cracked through the air like a whip. Comm spoke up. Sir, another hit-and-run strike was attempted by the Primi Remnant. We sustained no casualties. However, they didn't either. Did our forces attach the tracking beacon? They did, sir, but we haven't received any location pings. However, Sensors does have an update. Sensors swiveled in his chair. Sir, I've been studying our records of their FTL jumps. I've noticed an interesting pattern of radiation signatures, strange interactions between some sort of mystery particle and normal matter. I think we can detect their FTL signatures if I'm cleared to calibrate the fleet sensors. Granted, officer, however, I want you to do your calibrations elsewhere. Take your necessary staff and equipment into the quiet room. The excitement on the officer's face dampened slightly. However, he still jumped into action, gathering a bundle of slates and crew from his station. Is there anything else for me then? The Admiral intoned. I believe the ground forces have a briefing for you when you're ready, Admiral. Mostly strategy and general progress reports. A sharp ringing sound interrupted Comm's spiel and directed everyone's attention to Sensor's console, where sensors had become frozen. He quickly turned to shut off the alarm, but stopped. He stared at the screen, mouth agape, before frantically typing into the console. If possible, could you explain what's going on here? Litronox sighed. The alarm really was ear-splitting, even if it was playing from a tiny speaker. I'm not sure, sir. I installed a subroutine into the sensor array to try and test my theory out, but there's something triggering its search process. I have no idea what it could be. This program was designed to test radiation disturbances only meters from the hull. Place us on high alert weapons. Sensors. Where is the disturbance coming from? Nowhere nearby. Admiral, external cameras confirm. It must be a glitch, but I can't find any procedural faults. Unless... Sensors grabbed a junior officer. Watch these readouts, he shouted before racing towards comms. Can you tune your receptors to high-frequency gamma and NU outputs? I guess. Why? Just do it. Sensors watched over the officer's shoulder as her readouts shifted into an ugly violet. Spirits! Sensors? Litronox questioned. I think something's coming. It would be more accurate to say consciousness regained Zaid. The universe greeted its new partaker with an endless and concentrated agony. Zaid couldn't help but gasp and moan pitifully as his mind tried to work again. He tried to move, to clutch at his face, to do something to stop the agony. But it wouldn't stop. It wouldn't even pause. He cried for help, for a medic, for his mother, anything he could think of. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids wouldn't budge. At least one of them wouldn't. The other was a concentrated ball of pain that sent him into a terrible convulsion. He tried to feel his face, but his arms moved sluggishly. Violent pinpricks pierced his skin like so many tiny needles, each one slowing his laborious task. When his fingers finally brushed his eyes, he found them crusted with dirt and blood. He tried to rub away the congealed mess, but the careful ministrations did nothing but let the light through. At least it still works. He thought between rolling tides of pain. The sheer volume of blood did not bode so well for the other. He heard something and turned to face his head towards it, propping himself up. "Who's there?" He managed to wince through his teeth. It was silent for a time, so much so that Zaid flopped back to the earth, exhausted by the effort. "You're better than I thought, Marine," came a deep, rumbling voice. He tried to rise before a clawed hand kept him firmly planted to the ground. "Don't be alarmed, human. I am only here to help." A soft hissing sound signaled the dispensing of biogel, and his pain began to diminish ever so slightly. "I am a knight of the swords of St. Kalios. We are here to find the Master Chief." Chapter 10. Friends in Various Places. Fuck me. Running. Zaid had been in quite a few compromising positions in his life. He'd been scolded by his mother, a lot, gotten some unfortunate STI results back from ScrubSec, too much to count. Yet he'd never been effortlessly carried by a fully grown Sangheili warrior. That one took the cake. Ate it too. "You sure you couldn't have just let me die?" He groaned. Blood still trickled down his face, the Medigel dulling the pain. He'd heard that Sangheili medicine had improved in the years following the end of the Covenant. However, he'd never thought they would carry human Medigel, or any Medigel at all, really. "As much as I would rather not carry you, human, you are a high-ranking officer of your military, which means you might have the answers." The Sangheili cleared the rubble of the tunnels, the light blinding the Marine's face briefly, before his eye adjusted to the shock. "We are looking for..." Zaid was in a fireman's carry, which didn't give him the best view of the city. But as he turned his head, he couldn't help but gasp. What happened?" "Ah, it seems you were underground before the explosion." "Not answering the question, pal." The city had looked rough before. 2 weeks of interplanetary warfare tended to do that. But, God, the spire, the stout marble skyscrapers all had been reduced to rubble. A small raptor vessel skirted the smoking ruins, poking the dying city with bright, booming power every so often. Power that rumbled far off, signaling the end for another pocket of whatever was left. The vessel your stronghold was harboring performed an in-atmosphere jump, likely to escape the orbital bombardment that had commenced on its shield. "I'd also suggest you be quiet. We aren't alone out here," the alien growled. "Oh." Zaid fell silent. The air tasted of iron and ash. Twilight was colored queerly. Hints of green and purple burned across the sky. Smoke swam in this torrid glow, and ash swirled into twisted caricature, mocking the gentle clouds forced into retreat. The fate of this city hung in the air, the purple snow twinkling in the choking smoke. "We are close to my camp, human. Try not to annoy my fellows." Something whizzed past them, and the alien hit the dirt in the blink of an eye. A roar of displeasure met the rancorous snaps of the raptor's guns. The Sangheili screamed something alien before sloughing Zaid into the dirt. In a moment, a plasma rifle was in hand and blasting its glowing retort in the general direction of the enemy. "Use this, human!" Zaid barely caught the plasma pistol lobbed towards him. "Is this a fucking antique?" The Marine fumbled briefly with the circular weapon before launching his own barrage of fire downrange. Christ, pinned down in the middle of a street. They were, of course, lucky. The wide boulevards of New Landing were usually not marked with terrible craters, and thus would have been a killing field if not for the massive hole in the pavement. Raptor siege warfare once again working against them. The warrior took a long look downrange, shields absorbing the few stray pellets that managed to hit him before pulling back into the little foxhole they now called home. "You don't happen to have any smokes?" Zaid shouted. "I would have used them. It seems their holdout is 120 meters upstreet. I will shield you in a dash toward cover." "What?" Zaid was pulled into a bear hug as the alien leapt into the air, in a sprint toward the slightly more defensible ruins of something. The plinks of raptor bullets impacting the shield scattered like rain, before something got through. A sharp sting brought Zaid back from awestruck contemplation. Shit, his hand! The biting heat of his new wounds settled on him as they reached cover. "Fuck you!" He directed at no one in particular. He hoped his voice carried to the encampment, or that his shield would magically start working again. Either or, really. A voice squawked in the alien's headset, and a fierce bout of yelling began between the alien and presumably the alien's contact. Zaid took the time to peek back onto the street. A bullet zipped past him for the trouble. "Okay, fine. Fuck you." That didn't stop him from seeing the slow, inexorable advance of the raptor force. "The enemy is advancing, buddy. You have a plan?" "I'm working on it, human. Hold them off." "With what?" The elite tossed its storm rifle without a second thought, returning to its debate with his handler, or whoever. It was a hefty thing, practically as big as his arm, but it'd have to do. He maneuvered the weapon and began to spray fire the thing into the street, hoping it'd at least give them second thoughts. Still, it wouldn't hold them off for long. Indeed, it barely stemmed the wave of fire that quickly rendered the weapon a smoking piece of junk. Zaid barely had time to shout before the elite latched onto his shoulder and pulled him away from the blossoming power of a plasma explosion. A sharp beam of green erupted from a fuzzy mass of air in the sky, casting the surroundings in an emerald sheen. The earth shook as the ray smashed into the ground, and the unlikely pair was buffeted by a wave of hard air and sweltering heat. The Marine, weak from his injuries, barely weathered the storm of hot plasma. The second blast just swept him off his feet in short order. The third beam was probably overkill. In a moment, the patterns of sharp air seemed to refine, first into shape, then color, and then fully into the phantom that had been their savior. It lowered itself quickly to the ground, taking cover among the ruins as a tractor beam emerged from the bottom. "Quickly, human!" The warrior was on his feet in a snap, dragging the Marine by the armor plates, as the adrenaline thudded softer in his ears, and his body was ushered quickly into the air and into the safety of the newly cloaking craft. His eyes lingered on the smoking ruins of the street and the dazed survivors, the few there were, ogling the sight in awe. John shoved the garage door back open. "Let's go," he said tersely, sending the boy scrambling out. No vehicle again. At least Kaiden was good at following orders. A lucky thing, as John had little experience with children who didn't. The kid was superbly light-footed, extremely quiet. Only spoke when spoken to. There was certainly something more to that. Not many children went through what he had survived. Few saw what he saw. Fewer lived to tell of it. John debated saying something to him, and yet he couldn't think of anything. John's trauma therapy had mostly consisted of nothing. Hell, he'd never really been punished for anything in his life. He was never one for tricks and pranks, he had to admit. What was his name? On Reach, it was Kurt, wasn't it? Who played that joke on Kelly? Or was it Linda? He tried to see their face, the smile they sported, the laugh they shared before being silenced. A host of faces flashed before him. All of his friends, their eyes, their noses, Linda's fiery hair, Grace's faint freckles, Anton's. He couldn't remember Anton. "Chief, your vitals are spiking. Are you doing all right?" Cortana. He remembered her at least. "I'm fine, Cortana." It seemed she didn't agree, being that she appeared in a dialogue box with a look of determined concern. Kaiden was quicker on the draw. "Who's Cortana?" came a choked voice. "Fuck, I thought I'd—" Cortana took the lead. "Hi, my name's Cortana. I'm your friend's AI." The AI managed in a whisper through John's speakers. "Cortana, Jon began, muted this time as he pulled the boy into a steadier piece of ruin. "Oh, that's cool. What do you do?" Kaiden asked, mimicking the almost breathless whisper of his new companion. Something brightened in his eyes for a brief moment, and the huff of wasting time in dangerous territory seemed to die in Jon's throat. Cortana was already responding to the question as the Spartan eked out a silent 3 minutes. It was a quick 3 minutes. The child spit out questions about as fast as Cortana could answer, and for a moment, things almost seemed okay. He couldn't describe the feeling he felt watching the exchange, seeing the little twitch of a smile edge into Kaiden's expression, the cute little attempts he made to stifle his laughter tugged at something he'd never felt before. When Cortana cut the kid off, a part of Jon almost regretted it. "Let's get a move on," he grumbled, briefly checking his surroundings, before marching back into the street. There was a weapons depot close by. That brief ray of light was quickly shoved into the small part of Jon's brain, where he held his good memories. All around him was death. The purple flecks floated ever-presently, gathering in the crooks and furrows of the war-torn city. Covering the bodies in a parody of color, violet mixing with violent shards of blood and gore. The corpses of the raptors offered an occasional respite from contrast, the drying blue melding with lavender, forming a strange harmony of color. All was framed by the glorious sky, itself a reflection of the carnage below. It was in this awesome sight that he heard it. Over the incessant din of gunfire and low rumbles, it was unmistakable, even miles away. "Covenant?" he whispered. Cortana was quick to chime in. "It sounds like a plasma cannon. Should we—" "Kaiden, come here!" The boy was in place in mere seconds. "We need to make it somewhere fast. I need you to hold on to me." The Spartan picked the child up as if he were holding an unwieldy load of laundry and placed Kaiden on his back. "Hold tightly," he said before he began sprinting toward the target. It had been a while since he'd ran quite this fast. He noticed the lag in his step, the slight pain he felt as his heavy footfalls carried him over the ruined terrain. Deft placements of his boot crushed concrete shards and bent rebar steel, sent horrible reverberations through his bones. But that was not the issue. He'd done worse and survived unscathed. He'd broken worse and suffered through it. This was nothing. It was a short run, though not as fast as he would have expected. What he found wasn't welcome. The deep scar carved into the earth was still smoking, still burning its angry red. The asphalt still ran in some places, the violence of the blast having melded the road where it had not simply obliterated it. And yet, where was the Covenant? Their gaudy purple could be spotted for miles. Hell, from what Cortana had told him, he'd assumed that they didn't even exist anymore. Jon let that confusion simmer for a moment, before realizing what the target had been. Raptor corpses were strewn about the place, half burnt in some locals, or reduced to mere metallic shells. "Nice to see we're all on the same page," Cortana quipped. "I can't pick up significant readings, Chief. I think we missed the party. At least for now." Jon ducked back into cover, pulling the boy with him. "I need to get some sort of vehicle, but nothing around here seems to." "Jon, 6:30. He turned quickly, saw the half-burned body of a raptor. Propped up against a wall, its face was practically shattered by force, and its armor was barely visible beneath the layer of soot and cinder. But it was alive and pointing its gun. Not at him, the Spartan leapt for the boy, who it seemed was simply staring at the menacing alien. And yet 10 meters in half a second? Impossible. Jon heard the shot before he dared look. But when he looked, a purple glow had enveloped the child. That didn't matter now. He had to get him out of here. Now. Nobody knew what was happening. That was a common occurrence for Jessa nowadays. Something wasn't right with her body, with her mind. She couldn't stop feeling. Reaching out with something she couldn't explain. She simply couldn't understand the power that was coursing through her. It started when she awoke. Something jostled her, and her eyes flew open in an instant. She tried to move, to scream, but found no words and barely any strength. She did raise her hand, trying to stop whatever it was, and heard the scream. Well, The yelp. It was only when she turned that she saw it, the burning blue coursing down her arms. She started screaming herself, if she was honest. Probably would have done more had her catheter not been in. She felt no shame in that. Most people don't wake up on fire, generally speaking. In any case, yeah, she was burning for a solid 5 minutes. Only screaming for the first minute. Well, that was until someone came in with a fire extinguisher. That put a damper on the calm atmosphere. The next fire came an hour later, as a nurse was running a test on her blood. The little pinprick caused her eyes to flare, like a blue demon, according to the nurse's testimony. She didn't know what was wrong, why they'd moved her to an isolation ward, and why they only came to talk to her in hazard suits. She felt more and more like a freak, which if she reasoned it out, she essentially was. A kind doctor, a man with sharp eyes and an easy smile, came in to ask her questions. What does it feel like when you flame? Can you make it happen right now? Stuff like that. She didn't know what his name was. She never managed to get the question out in time. Shyness came easy to Jessa, especially when you were in a top-secret government facility, being treated like a peculiar rat in a peculiar maze. At least he didn't wear the suits with her now. He just kept an arm's length. The stress made it easy for the flames to show again, at least. It took a nice meal and a bit of rest for it to recharge, and then, bam, the flames ignited. It was a rush of energy, of power that consumed her. The power was always there, creeping at the back of her mind. It was like how she felt when she wanted to stretch her arms, but all the time. Releasing that built-up power felt good, she supposed. Like a nice scratch on a persistent itch, or finishing a race after a burst of speed, completing a hard video game. It was satisfying, thrilling even. The true realization of her power came entirely on accident, not uncharacteristically mind, when Smiles, as she called her nameless doctor friend, dropped his tablet right in front of her. She reached out to try and save it from a likely inconsequential tumble, and caught it. Just not with her hands. That was the first time she'd seen Smiles without one, and that had been the state of her for the past few days. Flexing what seemed to be telekinesis out of boredom, as they'd refused her access to a tablet, a phone, hell, even dusty old books. That meant it was just her in what she soon began to regard as a cell. She'd managed to decorate the place somewhat. They'd found it within themselves to at least give her a dry erase. She'd taken up writing on the walls. It was relaxing, writing down her feelings, calculating orbital velocities, drawing pictures of the starships that she'd hoped to fly. Her dreams of entering the pilot academy seemed so far away now. Flying interstellar big rigs was cool and all, ran in the family, as Uncle Arne used to say, but she'd always wanted more. She was in the middle of drawing an old longsword when the door opened. Good old Dr. Smiles entered. "Oh, hey, Smiles! What's—" He was followed by a door-looking woman, shoulders straight and legs girded by a drab gray pencil skirt. "Up. Jessica, I'd like you to meet the director of research at our installation, Thalia Sarama." The tight-lipped woman managed a tight grin as she stuck her hand out. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Shepard." She spoke in smooth voice, her light brown eyes meeting my own in a quizzical, perhaps even studious way. Yeah." Jessa shook her hand loosely before slinking back to her hospital bed. "I'm glad to see you're moving again, especially after such a nasty trauma. This whole episode must be really hard on you." "Sure, sorry, Director, but can we cut to the chase here? You're not just here to make small talk. We both know that." There's a certain relish in her voice, knowing that she could put a stop to this awkward conversation immediately. Yes, Miss Shepard, let's do that." The woman took her seat across from Jessa, with Smiles taking position at her right. "During your trauma, it seems a large amount of a potent form of exotic matter has embedded itself in your lymph nodes." Jessa? Oh, fuck, the director actually enjoyed that, didn't she? The wave of satisfaction she'd been riding slammed into the rocks just as fast as it began. "Like cancer?" Her heart thudded in her chest. She'd heard about cancers arising from plasma wounds before, but this fast. "We're not sure, Jessica, but we have good reason to believe that it's not dangerous, at least not yet. It seems that your body has integrated a substance we've recently discovered called null into your lymph and nervous systems. A look was exchanged between her two interrogators. Smiles spoke up this time. There is a possible explanation for your condition, but I need your assurance that it will be kept secret, Jessa. Jessa flinched. He'd never called her that before. Sure, I just want to know what's going on. There was a pause before the director leaned forwards. Jessica, what do you know of the mantle of responsibility? The married answer was in better shape than one would expect. That didn't manage to remove the bitter taste in Harris's mouth or the shaking of his fist. Zizka? Was all Harris had to say to make the AI appeared before him. Instead of his true form, the intelligence had been reduced to a shapeless glow of purple light. It seemed even the AI was stretched thin by the circumstances. Receiving Captain. There was no mirth in his voice, only the cold skeleton of duty. I'd like a status report on Lieutenant. Deceased. Sorry, Captain. Nothing we could do. Is there anything else? Nothing, Zizka. The AI's predictive speech terrified him sometimes. The AI was gone in a moment, back to running and aiding the various other tasks of the ship. Usually other junior AI would be helping him run things, but those had been stripped from the ship to aid in the defense of New Landing. Who knew where they were now, if they were even still alive? And Lieutenant Jin? Dead? Christ, they'd taken significant damage plotting their jump. With so little time to plot a course, gravitational interference had taken its toll on the vessel, as had enemy ships, as they plotted micro-jumps through the dark. The translite was still fuck keys 6 ways to Sunday, and that meant nothing but bad things. Still, Dancer made it to the rendezvous point and had found nothing. True, gas giants were, well, giant, but there are few places a ship can safely rest within one, as the Dancer currently was, and indeed even fewer places to gather food and much-needed medical supplies. Water filtration was running over time, and water was still running low across the ship. And food? They were just scraping by on S-rations. They'd be officially out of food in about 4 days. Feeding this many people after your food stores are raided by besieged civilians was no easy task. Christ, this whole business was no easy task. They'd been out here chasing ghosts for days and had continued to find nothing. He was seriously considering ditching the ship in atmosphere and finding somewhere to hide his crew in atmosphere. Captain, I'm picking up a slipspace transition. Estimated size at less than 5 ships. That was a promising number. IFFs? It's the Shanxi fleet. Lieutenant Arbridge turned in his seat, excitement plain on his face. We might be able to reach them in time, sir. Where are they? Harris coolly responded. He couldn't get too excited about this. Not yet. Why have they shown themselves like this? Can you get a tight beam to them, Arbridge? Not from inside atmosphere, Captain. Our concentrator is still fried. Nako, prepare the Mayday message and have Vang patch up our engines best he can. We're going to intercept. Harris was making his way to tactical as the engine sputtered to life. It shook the ship, and the inertial dampeners struggled to maintain cohesion. As the Dancer shook itself awake, Harris stumbled only briefly. Raptor vessels are approaching the fleet, Captain. 10 ships, even spread of corvettes / light frigates. I'm detecting weapons fire. We need to jump fast, Helm. Prepare your calculations. Sea-Doo, how's our Mac? Fuck, sir. Harris swore under his breath. How many shots? Sea-Doo was frantic, typing hard into the console as her subordinates scrambled around her. 3, maybe? Yeoman missiles are barely operational, Captain. We're at 25% operational readiness. I can't recommend we engage anything right now. Zizka appeared now, his form remarkably together. Captain, we can't afford not to try. We won't last without their assistance. Sea-Doo stood. And if we die in the attempt? We'll die if we do nothing. Enough, Harris finally shouted over the two. If we don't do this, we die. We can't let our fears stop us. A loud, impressive blaring shook the deck. Arbridge went white. Captain, we're receiving a slipspace signal. Estimated size at 250 ships. The bridge went silent. On main screen. Harris breathed. The Dancer broke through the clouds as the relief fleet smashed a hole back into reality. A smattering of forces pushed their way out of a swirling hole ripped in space-time. First came the screening fleet, a smattering of minesweepers and light frigates. Then the sleek frames of Harvest-class destroyers, the thick hulls of Hoplite-class heavy cruisers, the long dagger-like outline of Jupiter-class artillery ships, and of course, the supercarrier. I'm receiving an all-call captain, play at our bridge. It came clear as crystal. This is Garrison Fleet 3 from the UNSC Indomitable. The cavalry has arrived.